He always had this way of saying exactly what was on his mind, sometimes a little too much. Once or twice he'd thrown out some wild ideas like seeing me with another man, but I always thought it was just talk. The kind of teasing that happens between a couple, born from laughter or a loose conversation after a few glasses of wine. But that week, he came home different. He told me his boss, Mr. Norberto, an older, serious man, the owner of a stud farm, the kind of man who commanded respect with a single glance, had invited us to spend the weekend at his ranch, up in the Santa Catarina Mountains. "It'll be good for us," he said, and I, needing to breathe, agreed. On the way there, I noticed Márcio was quieter than usual. The car radio played softly, the road winding its way up through the mountains, and the mountain chill was already starting to fog the windows. Everything felt too calm, too quiet. When we arrived, Mr. Norberto received us with that manner of his, firm yet polite. And he said it right away, with a smile I couldn't quite decipher. "This weekend, I'm going to teach Márcio how to break in a filly." I laughed, of course. I love all that talk about horses, I thought. But he held my gaze for a second too long, and in that moment, I felt something shift. I didn't understand it then. I just found it curious. That sentence kept hammering in my head for the rest of the afternoon. I can't explain it, but it didn't feel like a simple joke about animals. It felt like a message. And stranger still, Márcio's silence afterward only deepened the chill I felt, even with the sun on my back. The entrance to the ranch was like something out of a movie, an old but well-kept wooden fence, flanked by tall trees that swayed in the cold mountain wind. In the background, the large white house with its blue windows stood imposingly, and next to it, the immense stable with its tin roof and the strong scent of rural life. It was beautiful, but there was something there, something that didn't fit with the tranquil scenery. Mr. Norberto made a point of showing us everything: the house, the orchard, the lake at the back of the property, and finally, the stables. The horses were magnificent, muscular, powerful, but my attention wasn't on the animals. It was on the looks being exchanged. First Márcio's, who kept casting furtive glances at his boss, as if waiting for some kind of approval, as if he were anxious. Then Mr. Norberto's, who watched me with a kind of calm that felt more like control. It wasn't the gaze of a man in a hurry. It was the gaze of someone who has already decided what will happen and is simply waiting for the right moment. When I stepped into the stable, a shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold. The scent of hay, damp wood, and freshly polished leather was intense. And between one comment about the animals and the next, there were long pauses, heavy silences. I was placed between the two of them, as if I were part of a silent conversation. It was as if I were being watched the whole time, and not by the horses. My entire body felt alert, my skin more sensitive, as if my instincts knew something my mind didn't yet want to understand. This was no longer just a weekend getaway. It was the beginning of something I couldn't name, but that was already living inside me, somewhere between discomfort and a hidden heat beneath my thick sweater. Dinner was served on the veranda, with the mountains in the background and the wind cutting through the cracks in the wood. The table was laden with food, but the atmosphere was anything but light. Mr. Norberto spoke little, but when he did, it was as if every sentence held a hidden meaning. Seemingly simple words took on a different weight in his mouth. And the worst part was, Márcio seemed to understand every nuance. I tried to act natural, pretending not to notice, but inside, I was on high alert. The laughter that came was timid, restrained, and the gazes grew longer and longer. They weren't looks of curiosity, they were looks of expectation. When Mr. Norberto raised his glass and said, in that firm, deliberate tone of his, "Tomorrow is the day we tame the filly," my fork slipped from my hand. Márcio laughed, but it wasn't just a laugh, it was complicity. And when he looked at me, there was a strange glint in his eyes, the look of someone who knows something. And the proof? That night we lay down together, as always, but the silence between us was heavy. The warmth of his body next to mine felt different, restless. He didn't touch me. He just held me from behind, as if to protect me. Or maybe to contain me. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't sleep. His boss's words echoed in my mind, repeating like a whisper through the pillow. Tame the filly. That wasn't about any horse. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was overreacting, imagining things. But the discomfort between my legs, the chill that wouldn't leave, the insomnia taking hold, they all said otherwise. It was as if a hidden, forgotten part of me had been awakened. And there, in the darkness of the room, I no longer knew if I wanted to fight it or understand just how far this could all go. I woke before the sun. The room was still dark, but my body felt wide awake. Márcio's touch the night before, however discreet, had left its mark. Not a physical one, but something deeper, like a presence clinging to my skin. I chose the thinnest wool sweater I'd brought, paired with tight jeans. I looked in the mirror. It wasn't vanity, it was defense, or maybe a provocation disguised as protection. I felt strange, as if I were preparing for something I didn't want to admit. Breakfast was almost silent. Mr. Norberto appeared on time, greeted us with a nod, and said directly, "We'll go to the stable after." Nothing more, just that. But the words seemed to stick in the cold morning air, and every syllable was heavy. As I was washing my mug in the sink outside, Márcio came up behind me, took my hand gently, and whispered, "Trust me." I froze. The breath caught in my chest. What did he mean? That this was all arranged? That he knew what was going to happen? I felt the urge to run, but also a hidden desire to stay. The idea of being watched terrified me, but knowing I was desired by two men, one of them my own husband, lit a forbidden fire inside me. I tried to push the thoughts away, to tell myself it was all in my head, that I would never be part of a situation like this. I wasn't that kind of woman. Or was I? And I had just never found out. That morning, the mountain cold felt damper, more present. But the heat I was trying to smother inside me was more stubborn, and the more I fought it, the more it clung to me. The stable felt even more alive that morning. The sunlight filtered through the cracks in the wooden planks, creating golden beams that cut through the dust suspended in the air. The scent of damp hay, warmed leather, and sweating animals seemed to intensify with every step. Mr. Norberto led the way naturally, pointing out the horses, the details of the reins, the sound of hooves on the dirt floor. But my attention was on something else. The touch. As he positioned me in front of one of the animals, his hand brushed lightly across my waist. A simple, quick gesture, but loaded with intent. My body reacted instantly. A shiver ran up my spine, my breath hitched, and the worst part, or perhaps the most provocative, was seeing Márcio standing there, watching it all, saying nothing. There was no discomfort on his face, no jealousy, just that same watchful, almost complicit gaze. I tried to hide my reaction, to pretend nothing had happened, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every movement, every pause between words, carried another layer of silence. Mr. Norberto explained about riding, balance, command, but the tone of his voice was different. He wasn't just talking about horses, or maybe he was, but the way he looked at me, as if every word were a test, a provocation, was undoing me from the inside out. My feet were firm on the dirt floor, but inside everything was trembling. I wanted to get out of there, run to the room, close my eyes, but at the same time I wanted to stay, as if my body knew that this silent game was just beginning, and that maybe I wanted to lose. Because deep down, what scared me most wasn't his touch. It was how much I wanted it to happen again. The afternoon went on as if time had slowed down. The sky began to cloud over, and the temperature dropped slowly, as if to match what was happening inside me. After lunch, Mr. Norberto suggested we go to the shed where he kept the harnesses. The three of us went, without saying much. The short walk there seemed to take hours. Inside, the light was dim. The small windows left the space in shadow, and the smell was thick. Old leather, damp wood, and something else, something coming from my own skin. The floorboards creaked under our steps, and the silence, that was what screamed. Mr. Norberto approached slowly. He stopped just a few feet from me and looked me in the eyes with a firmness that didn't ask for permission, but didn't inspire fear either. That's when he said it. "Do you trust your husband?" The question landed like a stone thrown into the calm surface of a lake. Everything inside me stirred. I swallowed hard. I looked at him, but I couldn't say a thing. It was then that I felt Márcio approach from behind. His hands landed on my shoulders with a warm lightness, and then a soft kiss, right on the curve of my neck. My heart hammered, my legs went weak, but I didn't move. It wasn't just a question, it was an invitation. And the silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. I knew that if I said a word, everything would change. But I also knew that by staying silent, it was already changing. And I remained there, motionless, between two men, between two worlds, the one I knew and the one I had never dared to touch. For the first time, I didn't run, but I didn't move forward either. I just stayed there. And that alone was a step far too large. The end of that afternoon felt charged with something invisible. The gray sky blended with the distant mountains, and the cold mountain air seeped through the cracks of the stable like a whisper that raised the hair on my skin. Inside, everything was too warm. The sweet smell of hay, the body heat of the horses, the creak of planks under their hooves. Everything was pulsing in silence, and without understanding why, my body was already awake, alert. Mr. Norberto didn't say a word. He just walked toward me with that way of his, firm, confident, like a man who doesn't ask, he just arrives. His eyes fixed on mine held no urgency, only control, precision. And that was more dangerous than any spoken word. Márcio stood a few steps away, watching me. His silence was even more provocative than any touch. It was as if he knew, or was waiting. And then it happened. It was an almost imperceptible touch on the small of my back. With his fingertips, he traced a path to the side of my waist. A restrained gesture, but heavy with intent. My body tensed for a second, then melted. The air seemed to change density. My lungs searched for breath as if relearning how to breathe. My heart was pounding, but without direction. He moved closer, slowly, until I felt his warm breath against my neck. A puff of air that made every hair on my nape stand on end. My legs trembled. The heat spread from the inside out, as if it were blooming from the center of my body and racing along every nerve with a will of its own. I knew what I should do. Take a step back, stop everything. But I couldn't. There was no fear there. There was something deeper, more ancient, a smothered desire that was now demanding release. It burned in silence, screamed without a sound. And there, surrounded by the damp smell of the stable, the sound of the horses in the background, and the weight of two men's eyes on me, I understood. I wasn't standing still. I was letting go. He didn't ask. He simply turned me firmly, so my back was to him, pulling my hair with a precision that made my neck tilt back slowly. It wasn't rough. It was exact, as if he could read my body better than I could myself. His hand, secure on my nape, made me arch slightly, and the world around me disappeared. I felt his heat behind me, his breath grazing the exposed skin of my neck. And even without seeing his face, I knew. He was watching me with intensity. The hay beneath my knees gave way softly, releasing a dry scent that mingled with the hidden heat under my skin. The stable wood creaked in the distance, and the horses breathed heavily, as if they were silent accomplices to this moment. His hands gripped my waist with certainty, pulling me against his body in a movement that made my heart race. The touch was direct, hot, with no room for hesitation. Behind us, Márcio's silence was not an absence. It was a presence, strong, dense. He was watching, not with eyes of judgment, but with a desire that seemed to echo our own. I could feel it. I didn't have to turn to know. When Mr. Norberto spoke softly in my ear, it was as if the sound passed right through my skin, straight to the core of what I was feeling. "Are you afraid of this?" he murmured. "Or have you been dying to feel it?" There was no irony, only firmness, only desire translated into a low voice and a sure hand. My body answered before my mind ever could. My hips moved on impulse, my eyes closing on their own. It was as if every part of me was yielding, clearing a path without resistance. This wasn't just surrender, it was a homecoming. And even with my heart racing, my body vibrating, I knew. In that instant, between the warmth of the hay and the firmness of his hands, I had crossed a line, and I had no desire to turn back. His rhythm was steady, certain, like someone deciphering every curve without ever having traced it before. Each gesture molded my body to the hay, warming my skin as if the heat were born from within. But as loud as his touch spoke, as much as his breath in my ear held me in suspense, what pierced me most was Márcio's gaze. I could feel him there, standing just a few feet away. I could hear his calm breathing, feel the weight of his eyes on me like invisible hands. And when, by instinct, I glanced over my shoulder, our eyes met. He didn't look away, didn't flinch, showed no discomfort. On the contrary, he looked at me with a restrained desire, with an acceptance that completely dismantled me. It was as if he were seeing me for the first time, without filters, without fear. Just me, stripped of all apprehension, surrendered, alive. What came next was not just a sensation. It was a kind of shock of truth, a charge that coursed through my body with force, yes, but also with a beautiful melancholy, like rediscovering something that had always been there, but hidden. My eyes filled with tears, and I didn't know if it was from the intensity of the moment or its meaning. Even in allowing myself this moment with another, I felt whole, as if, in crossing that line, I had come back to myself. There was no guilt, no regret. There was only a quiet certainty that this moment, daring, unexpected, real, was mine. When everything stilled, my body yielded slowly onto the hay, still humming. But my mind was clear, and Márcio's gaze, steady and serene, following me, said everything. He hadn't lost the woman he loved. He was watching her be reborn. We walked back from the stable as if carrying something invisible between us. None of the three of us spoke. Our muddy boots marked the stone floor of the veranda, and the night had completely swallowed the mountain sky. The cold seemed sharper, but my body still burned. Inside, it was as if a silent flame had been lit, one that no wind or water could extinguish. Something in me had shifted, and there was no longer any pretending it hadn't. I went straight to the bathroom, removing my clothes with slow movements, as if each piece carried a recent memory. I stepped into the shower and let the hot water run over me, trying to wash away what wasn't dirt. It was intensity. I closed my eyes and pressed my forehead against the cool tiles. I took a deep breath. I felt. I replayed every second of what I had lived in that stable, not with guilt, but with astonishment. Astonished that I had allowed myself this, and that I had survived it whole. Márcio took a while to come up. When he entered the room, I was already in bed, a towel still wrapped around my body. He approached slowly, sat beside me, and said nothing. He just looked at me, and it was the calmest, most meaning-filled look he had ever given me. There, in that silence, I understood everything. It was no longer a fantasy he wanted to live out. It was a part of me he wanted to set free, and in doing so, he had freed himself too. There was no contest, no possession, no jealousy. There was only surrender. A surrender given not just with the body, but with trust, with permission, with eyes that say, "Go, find yourself." And so I went. The next morning's sun flooded the veranda as if nothing had happened, as if the earth hadn't trembled beneath my feet the night before. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the flowers in the garden, and everything seemed normal. But I was no longer the same. I felt it even in the way I held my cup, as if the warmth of the liquid echoed another, deeper heat that still burned softly within me. Norberto appeared with his usual calm. We exchanged few words. He looked at me again, but this time without the intention he had carried before. It was a different kind of look now, respectful, sober. He said goodbye with a discreet kiss on my cheek and a slight smile on his lips, the kind of smile from someone who knows exactly what they've done, but doesn't need to say a word about it. And then he was gone. In the car, the journey back was silent, but it was a different silence than on the way there. It wasn't discomfort, it was digestion. The window fogged with my breath, and when I saw myself there, blurred, reflected between the trees and clouds, I saw something new. I saw a woman who had crossed through fear, flirted with guilt, and bathed in her own desire. A woman who had been touched, yes, but not just with hands. She had been touched in a place where before there had only been silence. I discovered right there what it was to be desired completely. But more than that, I discovered the pleasure of desiring myself, too, of looking at myself and finally liking what I saw. That woman born in the hay was perhaps the truest version of me. In the days that followed, the world outside remained the same, but I did not. I made coffee, did the laundry, answered calls, but there was something new in every gesture, a kind of presence that hadn't existed before. My body, though silent, remembered, not just the touch of another man, but the way I was seen, the way I was wanted, the intensity with which I was felt. But the most surprising thing wasn't that. It was realizing that I, myself, for the first time in years, desired myself as well. I would look in the mirror and recognize a flame that was not sin, nor shame. It was my right, my fire. That weekend in the mountains didn't destroy my marriage, as I had feared for a moment. It unearthed something that had been suffocated between obligations and habits, something that had been screaming inside me for a long time, and finally had the space to breathe and grow. Today, I don't apologize for what I feel, nor for desiring, nor for being desired. I've discovered that freedom isn't about doing everything. It's about allowing yourself to feel without hiding. It's about not being afraid to look within and find light, even in what you thought was only shadow.